Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Quite a large audience. That's nice to see. So we're going to do a session about logging from the ABL, from files to the cloud. And I'm taking over for Peter Judge, who unfortunately could not be here. This is a presentation from Peter Judge. I made it a little bit myself. And the original title was From Files to the Cloud Without Any Code Changes. That is not 100% true, but we get to that in this presentation. Unfortunately, the title was already made before I took over. So, we are consulting work. We have an ever-growing team of people. We're growing in a steadily pace. And on every company picture, there are still people missing because we are hiring new people. I'm Daniel van Doorn. I'm from Holland, actually. Senior consultant at Consulting Work. Started developing Progress in 1997 with version 7 as my first job. And I never left the Progress world, really. I was already early enthusiastic about writing toolkits and frameworks, not so enthusiastic about writing forms for customers. I did not really like that. So I did the more technical stuff, and in the last 15 years that has grown to what they first called configuration management, and nowadays DevOps. So I make sure for large organizations that they have continuous deployment, continuous delivery, and every now and then I also develop something in OpenEdge. So who is Consulting Work? Well, we are an independent IT consultancy firm primarily focused on OpenEdge and related technologies. We live in Cologne, Germany, United Kingdom, USA, and Romania. And yeah, I always say we have customers everywhere except for in Asia. We are a vendor of tools and developer tools, and we mainly focus on our consultancy services. Specialized in GUI for .NET, Angular, OO, software architecture, application integrations, and we are definitely experts in OpenEdge application modernization. So our portfolio, right, we do something with OpenEdge, Telerik, the OpenEdge Ultra controls, so the GUI for .NET side of things, Telerik, Kinvey, Corticon, WhatsUp Gold, and Camp Loadmaster. And we provide ProTop database monitoring for Europe in cooperation with ProTop. We do something with list and label, web frameworks like Angular, .NET, Java, Elasticsearch, Lucy, I still have to ask what that is, Amazon WS, Azure, DevOps, Docker, Jenkins, and Gradle, Jira, whatever there in the DevOps ecosystem, we do it. So, right, logging. Yeah, as said, this is a presentation by Peter Judge, really. And if you don't know Peter Judge, he was working for Progress as a senior architect, I think, and he has started at Consulting Work. But one of his last projects he did for Progress was writing something new with logging. And unfortunately, Progress does not really advertise it or do something with it. So I took the noble task on me to do that. Well, we will talk a little bit about what logging is, what kind of new logging component we have in the ABL, some implementation details, and some things about how you can customize and extend it. Why logging? Right. So Peter Judge would start with option 2, we messed up. Me, as primarily a DevOps engineer, do not really agree with that, so I put as one, we need to know when and why things happened. I love reading log files as a DevOps engineer. So verification of the software operation, traceable technical and business processes. Want to be able to verify those in the log files. And secondary, when we messed up or somebody else messed up. When something goes wrong in the code, we need to debug. I'm still old-fashioned. I don't really use the progress debugger. So I would prefer to put log messages in my code. I would also prefer to have those log messages written nicely and in a way that I can switch them on and off. So that you can just leave your log messages in the code, and when something goes wrong, you can just activate the logging. Well, okay. So logging requirements, this is a little bit of an open door, but when we want to log something, what do we want to log? Well, typically the time and date when it occurred, what occurred. So we see here on the bottom sample, a Meapuk started with a timestamp and user, in this case, my name. Well, in the beginning, and that was a long time ago, we had put and message, and people would use that in the code to do debugging. Then in version 10.0a came the log manager. And you could even extend the log manager yourself with a log manager class, and you could do a little bit more than just a message or a put statement. Yeah, what I said, the log manager is pretty decent. You have log entry types, you have logging levels, you can set a log file, and you can write messages. But log manager is one size fits all, and it's only configurable in the code. So, right, and that as a DevOps engineer is a bit annoying to me. One of the titles of this presentation was Logging to the Cloud. As a DevOps engineer, I would like to take a production system and turn off logging and for some component and decide, for instance, that for different components, I want to log to different streams. Last but not least, if you had to use the log manager, you always have to check from if the log manager log file unequals question mark unequals quote quote, then write message, else you could have an error. But it had low to no performance impact. So, if not the log manager, then what? Well, a part was implemented in OpenEdge based on SLF4J, Java logging framework. So simple logging facade for Java. They always make such nice names for Java stuff. Right. And it is shipped since OpenEdge 11.7. It's part of the openedge.core.pl, so it's always in the pro path and it's always in your installation. The logging component, right. So here we see some code from the logging component, and we see here that the logger here is defined as an interface, so you can use your own implementation for the logger. And we have here a logger builder, a factory, and with a getLogger method, and it gives us a logger. Then we can start use the logger, and we have there the things you are probably used to. the info, the warning, the error as a method. And we can log stuff like the EMEA perk has started and the webinar speaker started with an ISO data DB client. And we can also use trace. Right, method names indicate the names of the message. So the OpenEdge logging.ilog writer is the logger itself, and it consumes the log message. It has a name, and you can specify a log level. So here we look into the interface. We see some of the methods, the info as message. It accepts a progress.lang.error and openedge.logging log message. So here we have the log message class, which is serializable, and we have a group name. I come back to that later. Base text, message, and tokens. Tokens is also something I will get back to later. Right, getting a logger. So when you use this assign command, you get a logger, and that logger has a certain package, or you can use it for a certain package, and it will log everything under that package. So we see here demo.puck.uk.togs or demo.puck.uk. This will only log stuff that is under demo.puck.uk. Also, the log builder, it will always return you a logger. It's always valid. That's nice even when you log to nothing. When you want to log to /dev null, you still have a logger available. You can still write your messages. Right, so this complies with the package name of your OpenEdge classes. Implementation details, right. Yeah, as said, so it returns a logger instance, and that can be void, it can go to /dev null, but we can have a JSON configuration file like we see here on the right side. We see default logger for OpenEdge. The log level is error, so this will only do stuff for error messages. Then there are some filters. Filter is not really the correct word for it, unfortunately. It's really more like a format markup that it is, but we will go into that later. And this JSON file makes sure that you can change your logging configuration at runtime on a system without code changes. So yeah, there is this logging.config. It needs to be in the pro path, and it will just use the first logging.config, which it finds in the pro path, like with everything in OpenEdge. So when you have multiple, make sure that your pro path is correct and that it finds the correct one first. Right, so we can also set up a logger in the code. I'm not saying you should do this. I would even advise you to not do this, but I can at least show it. You have an idea of how it works. This is, in fact, more or less the same than what I just showed you in the JSON. So I have here a logger variable. I use the logger builder to build something on com.data.service as a package. And we log at log level debug. Then there are some formatting filters. As said, not really filters, more formatting. So we have a logger filter registry, ABL substitute format. You can look into those things yourself after the presentation comes available. And in the end, it returns a logger instance. Now, I said you should not do this because you should preferably use the JSON files to configure your logger. As a DevOps engineer, I like that much more than when a developer inside of the code is going to decide where to log and how to log. So, right, I already told something about logging to/dev null. We see here the progress of the OpenEdge logging void logger that logs to /dev null or to nothing. And we have a logger and also different logger writers, but that comes later probably. And we have the filter-based logger, but that's more formatting than filter. I still am annoyed by the name there. Right, so log event 1, at what level was the message logged at? That's of course the log level as log level enum. 2, who logged the message? Right, that's logged by as handle. I think that points to the client principal. 3, what was logged? Well, the time of when, yeah, that was the timestamp. Then, of course, the log message. And 5, if there was an associated error. So the filters, right, a log event is passed with a set of filters in order of definition. I'm repeating this for the 4th time probably, but it are not really filters, it's more for formatting. You can, by the way, also write your own filters. And we also have different writers, so we could log to a JSON file. We could use the log manager. We could use the named file writer, which does what you are used to with the current OpenEdge log manager, output to file and put something, and the void writer, which just deletes the logging. So, formatting filter, full text format, right. So this is an example of a filter which is used to format the logging. There is an execute filter method. And you see here that we create a message with the substitute, an ISO date, the message group, and the log level and the message. This code you can rewrite yourself, implement your own formatting filters. Right, writing a filter, the named file writer. So this just writes your log message to a file like we are used to for decades. There are some checks in there. When something goes wrong, I will get back to that on the end of the presentation. And we just put here the message to the file name, append. Nothing special, really. So token-based formatters. Sometimes you want to use in your log messages certain tokens, and there are already a lot of tokens provided. We will get a slide with unbelievably small text on it with all the tokens. You will see that shortly, but I put it in anyway before, because you can review this presentation at home, and then you can read all of those tokens. So tokens is this logger's way of substituting stuff in your log message. And right, the tokens are resolved by openedge.core util token resolver, which is in the PL. And you can just have a look at the source file. There is also an event published. You can subscribe to that event and implement your own token formatters. Right, so on our GitHub from consulting work, we have the openedge.core.pl extracted, and we have the class files, and you can just look at those. So here you see the event, token resolved, and this is published. You can subscribe your own methods to it. Right, this is the slide that you, well, who can read it? There are a lot of tokens for the web handlers and client principal and web-related stuff. Progress did not develop this for fun. Progress developed this because they had an issue at a customer with a web handler and a certain session, and they really only needed logging in a certain case to find out what the real problem are. So we will see a lot of tokens for the web handler. I did not put those in here. So we have a lot of date formatting options. We have the CCID, the session, the thread, the UID, the domain, some properties. I would advise you to read this at home when you really want to use it. That are the web handler tokens, right? So we have the URI, we have the host, the port, the verb, the method, the scheme, the transport, the path. And I put them in this presentation because there is no progress documentation on this subject. So this is like the only documentation there is, or you have to read the source files. So, well, one of the tokens in that small text 2 slides before was the CPUID, and it uses the client principal UID, and there was also a token for now. That was the ISO date. Now, I'll get DB client. Okay. So instead of using the ISO date and get DB client user ID, you can just use the tokens in your log text. Important here that the idea is that a developer should not really decide how the logging should look and how it should be substituted, but that we can do that on different ways. Right, tokens in the configuration file. So this is again the logging.config. Now we have a token with a filter on token format, and we have there the ISO date, the message level, the request, TPT, I forgot, the message, and logged by which user. Right, and here we have a named file writer, and it writes in the server with a date of today and with a request ID.log. So we could have a different log file in this way for every request, for every session, for every user. Makes debugging a lot easier. And yeah, what is of course great is that it's in a JSON configuration file. Update the JSON configuration file, and you have different, more extensive logging. Oh, MDC, right. Map diagnostic. No, I'm going to skip that. Data anonymization, right. So, unfortunately, here in Europe, we have GDPR, and we cannot just put usernames, account names, account saldos, etc. in a log file anymore, just for nice debug purposes. Because, well, everybody has right to privacy, it seems. Well, for as far as we know, at least. So what we can do is there are mechanisms in this logger to hash something like a username or a customer name, and it will generate a hash based on the solved. And that's great because it generates every time the same hash. It's a bit long and ugly hash. You could change that yourself to make it a bit shorter. Maybe I can already show that. Yeah, right here on the bottom is the beautiful hash that comes out of the anonymization. But you can use those hashes, and those hashes will be the same every time. So when I use Daniel van Doorn, it will always give me the same hash. So at least we can trace something in the log file, even while it's anonymous. Customizing loggers. Right, so we can add our own filters to the logging. We see here, it's a very stupid example, reverse word format. So we wrote a class that reverses all the words in a log message, and we can use that filter. And we have a builder and a type, and I skipped that one because that takes some fun away for later in the presentation. Right, so the reversed words filter, and then here is the definition of the class and the translation filter. Adding your own logger, right. So the log builder has a plugin, and you can design and create your own logging functionality based on the same named hierarchy. So example builders, translation, logging builder. We could use ChatGPT or Google Translate to translate our log messages to Swahili that at least nobody can read them. And that's all possible from OpenEdge. So there is just an event and you can use your own logger. So finally, where is that cloud that you promised us? Well, you may have already seen it a bit earlier, but you have the different writers. And here, for instance, we use an Elasticsearch writer, but it could also be another cloud servers wherever you want your logging to go. And then the title of this presentation becomes more true. When you have implemented this logger inside of your code, you can seamlessly log to a file, log to the cloud. You just have to convert all your message view as alert box and put stream unformatted first to use this new logger class. If you, by any chance, use the Smart Component Library with the log manager of the Smart Component Library, this exercise is a lot easier. We can just change the base class and then it will work. But the sample here, so we use Elasticsearch and we send all the logging to Elasticsearch instead of storing it in a local file. Ooh, almost at the end already. I have the feeling that only 10 minutes have passed. Troubleshooting, right. Yeah, it's nasty when you have a logger and a logger presents errors and that means that probably you have no log file or something is going wrong. Then where the heck is that thing going to log? Well, by default, it's using the log manager or the default agent log from your PASOA. So that's the session temp, no, that's the agent log. And if it's a client session, then it will use the session temp dir logger builder.log. If any filter throws an error, then the filter chain breaks. In short, don't make errors in your loggers. Right, I'm already at the end of the presentation. So modern logging separates the writing and recording of the messages from the formatting and from where you want to send it and how you want to treat the different events, like warning, error, info. As a DevOps engineer, I would like to decide in a running application where that logging goes, what I need, and how extensive that logging is. The OpenEdge.logging component helps with that. It's an easy API. It's simply extendable and customizable. And it's in the box already since 11.7.0. And I bet, well, how many of you have ever heard of this thing? Oh, some hands. That's so, like 10% of the people, 5. Okay, cool. So, any questions?
Logging config file, is that only read once? At the beginning, there's
yes. Yes.
Actually, Danielle, that's not quite right. It reads it regularly, so it looks for the file info to change and will read it in from time to time, but you can't instantiate brand new ones. So you can change logging level and change formatters, but you can't instantiate new ones once everything's started.
It depends on configuration, right? Because there was a problem that the log config was read too much.
Yeah.
And that caused very high CPU utilization.
It's on an as-needed basis. It's not all the time, so you can change it and then wait a little bit, and it usually picks it up. But there are only certain things that'll change in there.
Okay. Next question.
Is it possible to have more than one type of loggers?
Yes. Or you have one logger, but you can put it to multiple streams, but also you can log for different packages, like I said here. So yeah, you can have different loggers for different packages.
What I mean is like, if you want to log to a file, but also log to something in the cloud, but you don't want to do it in code, like you say, as a DevOps. You want to do it in a configuration file, so it's possible to have 2 loggers somehow.
You can do that with one logger. No. You can do that with one logger with the configuration files. Not showing everything here that we have. You should look on our GitHub. We have multiple logging.config examples, and some are really this big, split out with different log streams. Next question, yes, please.
Can you detect from code that logging is actually taking place, or? Suppose you want to collect extra info when logging is active, but you don't want to do it when it's just a void logger.
That's a good question. I don't know that out the top of my head.
I don't think so. Or test if it's the void logger?
You can test if it's the void logger, but I don't think you can add extra like you code the logging in there.
Yeah.
If it's the void writer, it just doesn't go anywhere. And so I always tell people, log as much as you want, and if it's void, it goes nowhere. If not, it goes somewhere.
Yeah, what is then important to mention is one thing I did not like so much about this logger. It's synchronous, it's not asynchronous, so it costs you some of your session time. Next question, please. No questions anymore. Then I thank you very much for your time. Please download the presentation. You can see all the tokens in the small letters, and it will help you. And I would really suggest, as a DevOps engineer, please play with this logger. It's really so much nicer than what we had until now. Okay. Thank you very much.